Hey, glad to see you back. Thanks for coming back for part 2 of this video. We're making some 5S compliant clamp racks that should hold 2 or even 3 times as many clamps in this same space. We've got another good day's work ahead of us to finish this up, so let's get started. All right, now we've cut our shelf standard blanks and we've been working on our shelf brackets for the clamps. What we know for sure is that these 2 holes here are going to go over the dowels mounted in the shelf standard. So these 2 holes essentially give us the location of the holes in the shelf standard relative to the edges. What we don't know is how far apart to space the holes. Now you can probably figure this out mathematically, but it's really a little bit easier than that. What I did was I took a couple of pipe clamps and I sort of precariously stacked them up here with some 1/2-inch scraps of plywood separating them. And then if I just measure from the bottom of one pipe to the bottom of the next pipe, I get 3 3/4 inch. I did the same thing with the aluminum bar clamps, and that came out to 3 1/2. So what I've decided to do is to space the dowels 3 7/8 inches apart. That'll give me just a little extra space to slip the clamps in and out and make it a little bit easier. So now we've got our hole spacing, it's time to drill some more holes. Okay, so we don't really want to measure and mark out these pieces for every single piece that we're going to drill, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw some lines on here to set the fence on the drill press, so at least the distance from the edge won't have to be measured every time. Now our first hole is at 1 1/2 inches from this edge. I've already drawn that. The second hole is at 3 3/4 inch. So using my woodpecker square, I just go to the 3 3/4 inch hole and put my pencil in and just pull the square along the edge of the plywood. And that'll make my mark. Then all we'll have to measure is just the distance between the holes. So at least we'll cut down on the measuring work a little bit. All right, now I've got my one board that I'm kind of setting up as a model. I've got my line drawn 1 1/2 from this edge and my second line at 3 3/4 inch from this edge. And this happens to be the wall side, so I labeled that wall side. At that point, I went ahead and labeled that this would be the top and this would be the bottom down here. Now what I'm doing is I'm making marks every 3 7/8 inch, and I'm just drawing a line across so that I get my holes lined up. Now the absolute dimension in here, I want to get it as accurate as possible, but the most important thing is that it's the same on every standard. So if you wanted to space some of these at a different dimension, that's okay as long as they match up on every one. Okay, so now with all the boards clamped together, my board with the marks on it on the front, the edges are lined up perfectly. So I'm going to use my little woodpecker's mini square actually to wrap these marks around to the edges. And this little square works really good for that purpose. I try to do that one right-handed so you can see. It's really easy just to line these up and use it like a saddle square. So then I can just take my T-square, line it up, and put marks all the way across the edges of all of the vertical support pieces, or the shelf standards, clamp rack standards as we're calling them. It's not bad for right-handed. All right, what I'm doing right now is I am putting some double-sided tape, and I'm sticking these boards together into pairs. And the reason we want to do that is because as we drill the holes, first of all, it'll make it faster because we'll be drilling 2 holes at a time. And secondly, it will make sure that all our holes are exactly lined up for each pair. Now, going forward, these will be permanently paired up. So now this is our go-by, and it's already labeled as our go-by, so I don't need to label that. But on all the others, I put a letter on both sides just in case the tape was to come apart. And now, ready to show you how to set up a drilling guide to drill all these holes and get them positioned properly. All right, now our goal here is, first of all, ease, and secondly, repeatability. So I've done a couple of things. First of all, I put in the 3/4 inch Forstner bit that we're going to need, and then I racked it all the way down to this sacrificial board and made a little tiny mark with the point of the Forstner bit. Then I used a square to draw a line out here. That tells me the line of exactly where this drill bit's going to come down. This is just a backer block. Then I've got this piece of plywood scrap here with a 45-degree angle cut in it, and I've set that up right on that line. I've clamped everything down to make sure it stays in place. And now, to drill through our pairs of wood, all we need to do is to slide it in up against the fence and line this pointer up with the line on the edge of the plywood. And that hole will be perfectly in position. Now, because I'm drilling into a sacrificial block and I don't want to go any deeper than necessary, every little bit dulls these Forstner bits. So I've set the stop on the drill press to go just a 1/16 of an inch or so into the backer block, just so I don't go any further than absolutely necessary. And there's our first hole. So now I can move the backer block to get a little fresh piece of wood, line up the line here on the edge of the board with the point on this 45-degree angle, and drill the next hole. And when the holes were cut to start to fabricate the clamp brackets, these holes were cut 13/16 in diameter. And the holes for the dowels are 3/4 inch, and the dowels are 3/4 inch, of course. So that gives us the ability to insert and remove these easily because there's a little bit of a slop. However, we don't want that slop to result in the bracket slanting down from the weight of the clamps. So what we're going to do is when we drill the second series of holes, we're going to offset those 1/8 of an inch up from the dowel behind it. And then when weight is applied to this bracket, it will pull this perpendicular and level with this shelf standard. So let's go take a look at how that's set up on the drill press. Now, to drill our second series of holes, we've simply moved the fence back and we've reset our pointer. But we've reset our pointer 1/8 inch over so that when we drill this hole, it will be slightly above this hole instead of in perfect alignment. And that will keep our shelf brackets level when we apply the weight of the clamps. One of the things I had decided to do early on was to make my cutout for the French cleat right on the standard, the vertical upright support piece. So I used one of my scraps and I cut it out, sort of hacked it out with a jigsaw and a handsaw, and made sure that it was in the right location and this was going to hang right where I wanted it. So after I got those dimensions set and made sure that that was right, I marked it out on one of the boards here, and then I clamped all the boards together in alignment. I drew a line across here and a line across here. I used just a regular handheld circular saw and cut a 45-degree cut here and a straight cut here, and I made a couple of relief cuts across the middle. Now I'm just going to take each pair of the standards to the bandsaw, cut along this line, and I'll have all of my cutouts for the French cleat system. Then we're ready to start installing the dowels. Assembling the upright, the vertical standards for the clamp bracket system, we're going to use 3/4 inch diameter dowels glued into the holes along the back side of the upright assembly. These need to be cut to 2 3/8 inch long, but you want to check the measurements because plywood thicknesses vary from location to location. To cut these, I'm using the bandsaw. You could use a miter saw, but be sure and build a cradle or some way to hold the dowel in place and set up a zero clearance fence for safety. Here on the bandsaw, what I've done is I'm using the miter gauge to hold the dowel square. I've set up a block of wood here. If I shove this dowel to the block of wood, that establishes the length. And then as I push the dowel forward, just as it clears this piece of wood, it makes contact with the blade. And I'm using a wood slicer blade, so I'm not getting any splinter out on the back side of this, so it makes the cut nice and smooth. And you just got to cut a whole bunch of these. Okay, we're ready to assemble the vertical upright or standards for the clamp bracket system. What we've got is we've got our pair. We've taken it apart and removed the double stick tape. And you want to be real sure now that your notch here for the French cleat or whatever you have as the backside indicator of your clamp standard, that's the one that's going to get the dowels glued into place. The dowels in the front are removable, and that's what makes the whole thing adjustable. So I've got the dowels ready to glue in, and I've cut spacers. And you want spacers that are long enough to span pretty much the whole width of the standard so that when you glue this into place, it holds both sides of this equidistant and holds it right in place the way it should be. After we get some glue on one side of these dowels, then we'll put a little glue on the other side of these dowels and push this down into place. And we don't even really need to clamp it. The brackets will hold it in place, or maybe just put a little weight on top of it, let it dry for a bit, and go to the next one. Now to get ready to cut out the clamp support brackets, we need to first make a template. And we've got all of our blanks pre-drilled. These are the ones that I've pre-drilled for the aluminum bar clamps, but we also have the ones that we've pre-drilled for our pipe clamps. These two holes right here are the ones that are most critical from a dimensional standpoint. So we want to look at the drawing and transfer these main cutout lines to one of our pieces. And you just want to look for a piece that's got smooth edges, no voids, something that'll serve as a good template for you. So the first thing to do is to establish the center line exactly on this board, and then using a square, strike a line that runs from the edge right through that middle. Just establish that center line there. Then the next thing that we want to do is we want to put a line here that runs across, and this line is 1.5 inches up from the bottom edge. Now I've already marked the location and double checked that, so I'm just going to draw that in, and what we're going to do is we're going to draw it all the way over to this hole. Square lined up and draw all the way to that first hole. Then it will be a dimension of 1 13/16. Make a tiny mark right here on the edge, and that looks just right. So we'll strike a line now at 45 degrees over to that hole. All right, we're almost set up. Now take your square, may need to extend it out just a little bit, and lay it on the edge and get it to where the line will intersect exactly with the edge of this hole, and draw a line there. Okay, and this is all area that will be cut away. Now we need to strike a similar line to the edge of this hole, on both sides. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to cut away all of this area all the way up to this area and this area to the edge of this hole. The last thing that we need to do is to mark straight lines down to the edges of each of these holes. And that will form our U-shaped notches. All right, so I'm just going to go to the bandsaw now and very carefully cut these out. And then we'll come back and we'll clean it up with sandpaper, make sure the edges are nice and straight and that everything looks exactly like this drawing, and we'll have our template ready to go. All right, and here's our finished template. Actually, I made two, but they're identical. And now all we have to do is lay this on top of each of the pieces, trace out our cut lines, and we can just cut out all of our brackets. All right, now if you were really careful marking these out and tracing out off your pattern, you should be able to kind of mass produce some of these cuts. Like for instance, this cut along the bottom here, I've set the fence up, and I've been able to do all of these at the same time, and my cut's falling right on the line every time. All right, now the next repetitive cut that we can set up using the fence is this line that was struck dead center on this bracket going into this hole. So we'll just line that up. And we'll make all those cuts. All right, now you want to freehand as little as possible, and you also want this to go fast. So I've set up the miter gauge in the track, and I've set a stop block here to cut this first section out, right on that line, and make our complete notch. All right, so now it's time for a little bit of almost freehand cutting. We're going to use the miter gauge just to make sure that the piece stays straight, and then we're just going to attack those lines. And Don't get them absolutely perfect. It's not the end of the world, as long as they're not too narrow. If they're too narrow, your clamps might not go in. We can actually freehand the rest of this. Setting up to cut the dowels for the front of the bracket is exactly the same as the dowels that we glued in, except we want to make them a little bit longer so it's easier to grab them and pull them out and push them in. I set mine at 3.5 inches. Installing a clamp bracket is easy as can be. Just stick it in and let this half circle go under the dowel in the back. Hold it up a little bit, insert this dowel, and let it drop on to the removable dowel. And that baby is there. So here we go. There are now 36 clamps in the space where I stored 18 before. And the best news is I've got room for a few more. I think I'm going to go order a couple more of these aluminum bar clamps right now. As a recap, to build this project, we used a pile of 3/4 inch plywood scraps. It's a good thing. We also used some 3/4 inch hardwood dowel stock. In my case, that's all I needed to purchase. We also learned several techniques for drilling repeatable holes without a lot of measuring and marking. How to cut dowel stock safely on the bandsaw, and ways to speed up cutting out all of the clamp bracket parts. We used Forstner bits to drill the holes, 3/4, 13/16, 7/8, and 1 3/16 inch bit. We used the table saw, the drill press, a lot, and the bandsaw. You could use a jigsaw. You can get all the supplies and tools you need from Highland Woodworking. You can also order these great aluminum clamps from Highland. And you can download the detailed drawing of the clamp bracket by going to highlandwoodworking.com and clicking in the top right corner where it says Library. Scroll down till you see the Down-to-Earth Woodworker and you'll find the drawings there. I hope you enjoyed this project. Thank you so much for watching. See you soon.